Okay.
We get to talk about the town of Vail. One of our favorite projects. Way before we had the terms for co-investing, we were co-investing, so they couldn't afford our full fees at the time. And so we negotiated that they compensated part of our fees. They compensated part of our fees with location very near the slopes and ski pass. And so I think we came up with something crazy where we skied in the morning and then worked in the afternoon, or worked in the morning, skied in the afternoon.
Yeah, 12 to 4 we skied. We had lessons with Hans when we wanted them. He was great. Taught us how to ski on curved boards. It's beautiful. Crazy, beautiful trip. Intense, crazy work schedule.
Yeah, so working all morning with the town Vail team, and then skiing all afternoon, and then coming back and doing all the analysis.
Design flaw as well, but
it was a beautiful place to do it. My kids were there, so Jackie was 3, Connor was just born, he was almost a year old, and we were skiing in Vail, Colorado. This is early December 1998, the first week or so, or first few days of December 1998. We've been invited in by our very close friend, Scott Spann, who we've been working with at Texas Utilities, and to work with the town. And the challenge before the town was we're a successful global destination, at the top of the rankings for all of that, and running into some difficulties for how do we continue to attract top talent to serve the people who are coming here as a global destination. Because of the success, what I remember is it was becoming a very expensive town to be in and to live in. And so the world-class staff, a lot of Olympic skiers and professional cooks and all of the different services couldn't afford to live in town. And so then they were having to live in the next valley over, or a couple valleys over, and not great conditions. So how do we make it a wonderful place to live and a global destination at the same time? And so they invited us in. We did a strategic clarity process, which was 2-3 years before we even had the book out, the Managing from Clarity book. But it was doing the strategic clarity systems, strategic systems mapping and analysis that we had at that time. So this was a couple years after you had joined, right when you had joined with us, one of our first projects together.
Yep.
In this space. And it was a great time to get to be there together. We had, with me and you doing that work, we had Scott was there helping out, and I believe Lusma was doing some work with us.
Lusma was there.
And working through the analysis. So we included the Town of Vail team, management team of the Town of Vail, and they had all of the perspectives that we included in the mapping. We had an interesting issue I remember in the beginning is, did we include the ski company and who also own the mountain? And it was chosen in the beginning not to. And that one of the insights that was gained that I have leveraged into many of our projects afterwards was the ability to see that we really need to understand this other voice that isn't the friend, but shifting from seeing that they're the problem, the they is the problem, to we need them to be part of the solution. We think we understand them until we get into the analysis and we started to realize, we being the Town of Vail, that there are key things in their perspective we don't understand. And maybe we want to invite that in. And so using these tools as a way to shift from, we don't need them in here because they're the problem, to, if we're going to embrace all of this, we need them in the room. And so how can we invite them into the room? And what I remember is we met with the team in that lovely office they had. They did a bunch of interviews. We put it all together as a map. We reviewed the map with them. We did the analyses that we had at the time, reviewed those with them. and started to come up with some strategic ways of thinking about their whole system as a team together. And I think there were probably 8 to 10 people on that team. So I remember sitting around the big table. One of the things that I loved that I found out afterwards, as my remembering of it, is that Bob McLaurin, who was a town manager that we were working with, him and his team, went on to Jackson Hole, and then I think came back to the town of Vail later. And I heard from him and Scott years later that the big map that we had developed for them, the big systems map, they had blown up really big on the wall, and it was on the wall of the office, the town management office, and that they were using that to walk through their thinking, and that what we called the plumbing of the system at the time was still relevant, and they were actually using it for strategic decisions years later. For one thing, I remember, for example, they were telling me a story of trying to deal with parking, and parking had gotten really expensive and people were starting to charge a lot for it, and they didn't have enough, and so they were looking to maybe take it out, and then through the map they saw, no, we got to do the opposite, we got to provide a lot better and more. So Bob had described how it led them to what initially were counterintuitive decisions, but that they could all come together around. So those are some of the big things I remember from some of the process we did. I remember we presented it to the town. There was a presentation by Bob and somebody else in the town, some elected officials, to a broader audience of people afterwards. Yeah, so what other things are you thinking of, or are you remembering from this time?
Well, from Bob McLaurin's seat on the bus, he's an elected official. So his community was claiming against him. It was the Mountain Experience guys. It was Mountain Experience versus Premier Resort. Those were the two competing energies in the valley. And so, as an elected official, if you want to get elected, you know, who do you have to make happy? Not Vail associates only. You got to. So he was pulled in two very, very distinct directions, and so I remember that being very, very clear. The key capital investment decisions, which are the ones that came up, like the parking, and there were some others. So remember that people who come in to visit and go ski don't care about the schools. They don't care about the sidewalks that are not related to the ski resort. They don't care about the parks that they don't see. They don't care about that stuff. They care about the hospital, and they care about the healthcare because that's a relevant possibility. They care about the restaurants. So they don't. The idea of, from a town manager's perspective, how do I balance the desires that drive big money, but not necessarily big, tax revenues, or the tax revenues from the properties these very expensive homes generate, provide a voice into what is approved and not approved because they have a say from the tax perspective, but they don't live there. So the people who were living there felt underserved and unattended to and not appreciated. And also they were being marginalized because of the financial squeeze that a limited valley will do. When more money comes in, lower income stuff has to go out. So that was they had to decide what to do, and who are the we when we look at the valley, what happened, and they had to expand what that actually meant and provide decent. And they ended up doing that, as I recall. They had to rethink what it meant to live down valley and make that a more dignified experience for people who had to do it, and provide better transport, so that it wasn't such a burden, and that the quality of their lifestyle was not so damaged by having to move down valley, because that was the truth. Big money won, and they had to tell that story in a compelling way to the community, that the community could understand how the town managers got to that thinking, and not just being a Vail Associates whipping boy.
Right. Really, I remember that. And one of the other issues was, and it became obvious from the archetype analysis that we had done and some of our leverage analysis, that one of the easy things to do would be to start giving people, to fill the slopes by giving discounts. And sure enough, they'd been trying to bring in people like my family, from my brother from Denver and Boulder, with day passes. But what they discovered, and the system showed, he said, that's great, but these people don't leave money in town.
They bring their lunch.
They bring their lunch, they fill the shuttles, and the people who are bringing the big money don't want that kind of thing. So how do you think about, as you said, these two different parts of the system that we had, of the town, people who live there and who are providing these services, and the people who are coming to receive those services? Can you embrace both of those in a high quality way at the same time? And there weren't very many examples for them to look to of how to do that.
And they had the competing, didn't Beaver Creek, another Vail Associates property, a premier resort of super premier resort, was being built at the time, maybe 20 miles away down into the next valley. And it became and has become a super premier resort within the Vail Associates network.
Right. Yeah.
How does Vail not lose all of its cachet to the guys down the valley? They had to deal with that also.
Yeah. So this is a great example for me of early work that we did, of trying to bring multiple stakeholders to try to see their system. What do we want to embrace in it? And how it shifted the conversation from us and them to who is within the us. As we said, one is the consumer that's arriving, and the full experience that they're having from before they get to Vail, when they start thinking about coming to Vail, till after they've gone, the full range of experience, as well as the people who live in town. Do we embrace all of that? And then the solution to do that, it became very clear to them that they had to embrace that a deeper relationship between the town and the company. But now had a reason to want to do it, and a way to what to invite them into, what to engage, what conversation to engage them in, the company in, for the future of the valley. And that was a big shift that they had brought out also.
And they flipped their capital investment plan about 180 degrees. As I recall, they were going to dedicate it specifically to pleasing the town members at the cost of the premier resort. The resort can take it. And that flipped 180 degrees from what I remember Bob told us afterwards. He was so surprised. He couldn't believe it. And he was so convinced before that he was the right thing to do. And he was so convinced, equally so, afterward. It was the other way around. That was a fascinating shift, the biggest shift, I think, that I recognized.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah, so that was a lot of fun. And we got to ski.
It was a ton of fun.
And we got to work late hours. And so that was a lot of great time.
And eat a lot of mussels. Good.
That's great. All right. Thanks, Hal.
Great. Take care.